welcome to The Winning Mentality. My guest today is a pretty extraordinary guy who's got not only the skill of relating his story to the average person, as you will find out, but also the desire to help others who've got problems of their own. Erik Weihenmayer gradually lost his sight as a teenager, and he talks us through what that period of his life was like. And while that was obviously a desperately tough experience, it would be fair to say he's not allowed his lack of sight to hold him back. In 2001, he became the first blind person to climb Mount Everest. He's climbed the highest mountain on all 7 continents. He's kayaked the entire length of the Grand Canyon, and he's helping others with challenges of their own to live fully. His amazing program, called No Barriers, helps tens of thousands of people with a variety of challenges in their life. And their slogan is, "What's within you is stronger than what is in your way." And having spent an hour or so chatting to Erik, I can think of no finer summary of his approach to life. This is uplifting, funny, and continuously engaging stuff. Enjoy. Erik, welcome to the show, and thank you for your time. I know you've just got back from a series of trips at Nepal, Mauritius.
Yeah, I travel quite a bit for climbing and sometimes for speaking to different teams and working with different teams around the world. So yeah, I got this crazy opportunity to go to Mauritius, which is on the off the east coast of Africa, and it was really, really beautiful and like being on this desert island. And then I had some other things going on, but then went to a family reunion in New Hampshire and hung out on this beautiful lake. And now I'm home talking to you. So I just got home like a day or two ago.
Well, I appreciate your time. And I actually passed through Golden. You live in Golden, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I passed through Golden, I don't know, a month ago, but sadly you weren't home at the time because you were in Nepal.
No, we were on opposite sides of the earth.
Yeah, just tell me what you were doing in Nepal.
Well, I founded this organization called No Barriers about 13 years ago now, and we work with about 10,000 people a year, and they're people with challenges, but not just physical challenges. Kind of, our definition of challenge is pretty expansive. We found pretty early on in our community that like people were showing up and they didn't have physical challenges, or maybe they did have a physical challenge, but they had other invisible challenges like emotional stuff, trauma, PTSD, anxiety, fear, all these sort of invisible things that hold people back, including poverty or people having experienced loved ones dying. How do you get through that? All these things that stop people. And so our mission is to help people with challenges. Again, that's all of us, to break through those barriers and find purpose and give back to the world in some way. So that's been keeping me very busy and becoming a life mission. So I was in Nepal leading one of our programs with our youth groups. We had a team of kids ranging from physical challenges like blindness, deafness, cerebral palsy to, as I said, emotional things like some depression, addiction, kid who had struggled with violence, young lady who had struggled with some emotional things like cutting. And so it was a really great team of kids just coming together with the diverse, abilities and challenges, and then doing a big adventure. So we went up to the Mustang region of Nepal, and we trekked and we horseback rode up through the Mustang region, which is this ancient sort of trading region, sort of close to Tibet. You're hiking up through this canyon with Dhaulagiri on one side and Annapurna on the other side. So these peaks loom, 20,000 feet above you. So it's the deepest canyon in the world, and it's just tons of culture and history. So it was a trip for the kids to really learn about a new culture and, kind of compare and contrast, and then also learn about themselves along the way.
And when did you set up No Barriers?
I think the beginning of it for me in the conception was in the early 2000s when I met this guy who was a hero of mine, who was his name is Mark Wellman. He's sort of like, I think, maybe the grandfather of disabled climbing. he broke his back. He's in a wheelchair, and he got back into climbing, and he climbed El Capitan here in the U.S. Uh, he did 7,000 pull-ups up the rock face with this cool pull-up bar that he invented. And then he went back and climbed Half Dome. And so he invited me on a climb, and I was thrilled. Like, yeah, of course. And he said, I'm going to have a third guy with us, and his name's Hugh Herr. Hugh was a double leg amputee at the time. He was he had lost his legs in a climbing accident on Mount Washington in New Hampshire in the winter. He got turned around, his legs froze, and he wanted to climb again. So he started building his own legs and building these feet that could wedge into seams and do all sorts of cool stuff. And he could make his prosthetics longer or shorter depending on the climb. And they called him the first $6 million man. So he was our third climber that day. So we were kind of a, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle team. We climbed this beautiful tower in Moab, outside of Moab, called Ancient. It's one of the Fisher Towers.
People should Google that. It's one of the most stunning towers out there. Hey,
it was so beautiful and such a special thing to climb with these two heroes of mine. And for me, that was the beginning of No Barriers, because I saw like this No Barriers innovation and mindset in action with two living people that had just gotten destroyed. They'd gotten shattered, and then in the process of rebuilding, they came back into the world and found themselves, the best version of themselves, found a good place, were truly living. And I was really fascinated by that process that they went through, right? So many of us go out and try to do, live a great life, and we just get beat down along the way, and all this stuff accumulates, that becomes like a blockage. And I was fascinated by these are two guys that didn't let that happen, and I wanted to understand, what was internally inside them and what the process was that they used to break through so many barriers in their lives. And so No Barriers became an outgrowth of that experience, and we've been growing and evolving ever since. And now we're a staff of 40 almost, and work, as I said, with about 10,000 people a year.
But I don't know if it's your natural modesty or the way you tell the story, but it should be borne in mind that you've got your own barriers.
Yeah, I'm blind. I went blind when I was 14. I forgot to mention that.
Yeah,
I forget.
I mean, you kind of you're saying that these guys have got these incredible barriers to overcome, and you're trying to learn from them. But you'd had a pretty long journey yourself.
Well, I connected with them in that way that, like, not, triumphs are different. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Maybe we share triumphs too, but they feel different for me, but struggle seems universal. And that's the way I connected with these two guys, not through like these incredible climbs that we'd all done, but through the struggle that of trying to reclaim your life. And I think I really deeply connected with that message. I remember after going blind and sitting in the cafeteria my freshman year in high school and just going, God, I'm like in this miserable prison and I don't want to be here. How do I get out of this thing? So yeah, you definitely viscerally relate, when challenges have happened to you. And that's why, when I meet people and a part of our No Barriers community, I just have a deep connection with them because we all share this yearning to kind of break through the challenges that are, one inside of us and two in front of us.
Well, it's interesting because you're not actually the first blind guest on the podcast. We had an interview with Mike Brace, who is a vastly successful Paralympian.
Oh, wow.
He lost his sight completely when he was 10 in an accident. But you had a different experience, did you? Because you lost your sight gradually and you kind of knew it was coming.
Yeah, when I was 4 or 5 years old, my dad noticed that my eyes weren't tracking very well. And that led to, dozens of doctor visits. And they finally diagnosed me with the super rare disease, juvenile retinoschisis, like a genetic X-linked retinal disease that the doctor said there was no cure for, and I'd be blind by an early teenager, and there's nothing they could do for me. So, I lived my middle school life as I went blind, trying to ignore it, which is what any reasonable person would try to do, I think. And then when it happened, when I went blind, well, it was a struggle losing my sight too. You know what I mean? It's like a door sort of slowly squeaking shut. You know, you wake up and you can see less and less and less, and the blackboard, the whiteboard's getting further and further away. Books, print and books are getting smaller and smaller, and I'm able to, walk down the driveway, down the street to the bus station, to the bus stop one day, and the next day it's like a foreign landscape because I can't see through the shadows. And anyway, I just continued to ignore it, and then I went totally blind about a week before my freshman year in high school. And then it's just like getting hit in the head with a baseball bat. You're like, this is it. Like, this is death. This is not to be too dramatic, but it was like something had died.
But I think for most people, getting into that age group, the high school puberty age, is desperate if everything's going great because you're trying to figure out who you are, what you're all about, your sexuality, everything is new. You're trying to find your way in the world.
Yeah.
What was that period like for you?
I just wanted to fit in. I just wanted to blend in, you
Which
know?
I think everyone does.
Yeah. I didn't want to stand out. I didn't want to be blind. Blindness was like, this evil thing, that like people would look down on me. They'd pity me. I was, in No Barriers, the book I wrote recently, I compared it to like, you're like an egg that gets cracked in the hallway and everyone's stepping around you. They don't know how to act around you. And, and I was, like I used to be something different, I don't know who I am now either. And so I just wanted to fit in. And so I was a jerk because I pushed everyone away. And I was probably pretty angry, although at the time I wouldn't have defined myself in that way. But what brought me back, I think, to the world was that I didn't want to be on the sidelines. And so I would try things, dumb things like driving my friends' cars, maybe around after parties, but also good things too. Um, like I got this letter in Braille of a group that were taking blind kids on these recreational experiences. And I couldn't do ball sports anymore. I'd sit there in the gym, bleachers, listening to my brothers like pound up and down the basketball court, scoring baskets. And I was like, well, what am I going to do? And when I got this letter, they were inviting me to try out different sports that blind people did. And my dad would drive me 3 hours to where we would embark on these adventures. We'd go canoeing or sailing or tandem biking. And then one weekend they took us rock climbing. And I mean, I went to New Hampshire. It was this beautiful fall day, feeling my way up the rock face, this beautiful, impeccable granite, the cracks and little edges and, stuff that I was trying to figure out, like how to use my hands and my feet and feel my way up the rock climb and figure out the patterns in the rock, that I was discovering in my hands, like trying to figure out, okay, where do those patterns lead me? And getting your body from point A to point B and like going through this total puzzle, trying to just work yourself an inch higher and an inch higher. It was like the most engaging thing I could ever imagine. It was so awesome. It was the opposite of what I thought that prison of blindness would be. And I remember getting to the top of this rock face, and I was up pretty high, not that high, but maybe like 100 feet. And I was listening to the valley below me, and I could hear the breeze blowing through the trees, and blind people use something called echolocation, where you click and you can kind of hear sound vibrations bouncing off of things, trees and rocks, and coming back at you, and you get information through your environment. And I was listening to that valley below me thinking, this is just stunning. And I just kept climbing. I never wanted to stop. So that was 30 years ago.
There's an interesting process somewhere along that line because you've gone from ultimate depression to, I don't want to say ultimate jubilation, but you've found something to base your life around. You've found something that defines you. At what stage or how long into, say, high school or being completely blind did you think there might be a life for me that I'm passionate about and that excites me?
Well, it's interesting because I would have never used the word depression. You know what I mean? Because like I
Okay.
don't, I would, I was, although you're 100% right, it was like kind of depression, but it gets manifested in just like anger. Just sort of like don't help me. You know what I mean? Like I don't need your help, that kind of thing. And so one of the things I had to learn was to get comfortable with blindness. To get comfortable with the tools of blindness and to say, okay, like I have to use this cane. I have to learn Braille. Like that's the only way I'm going to be able to read a poem in class like the rest of my friends. Or I have to use a computer with a voice synthesizer. I have to climb with my hands and feet. I'm not going to see the holds up above me and climb like a sighted person. I have to sort of chart my own course. And that's the excitement. That's the adventure of life. So I had to reconcile myself to that. And that was a really good thing. That brought me back to the world. I also joined the wrestling team.
Oh,
And
you have to tell that story.
I loved wrestling. It was like rock climbing for me because I was a part of something bigger than me. It wasn't like blindness was the center of attention. I was just this kid on the wrestling team. And yeah, I remember tapping my cane, up the empty hallway towards the stinky wrestling room. And my first day, I was so nervous. But my brothers knew somebody on the team, and so they kind of welcomed me in. And then at the end of practice, this little guy, he's like a 100-pound guy. He was a state champion. He would wrestle all the freshmen. It was basically just to like humiliate them. And I was maybe like fourth in line. And he dragged this one guy out and just slammed his face into the mat. And then the second guy slammed his face into the mat. Third guy slammed me, took me out. He flipped me all around. I slammed my face into the mat. And I was like, I was so happy because he didn't baby me. He didn't like, treat me any different. He pounded my face into the mat just like every other little pimply faced freshman. And I was like, thank you for doing that. That guy and I became great friends. And he didn't treat me any differently. And I was part of something. I'd found like a family. And I tell that to blind people or people with challenges all the time, like go join something uh, bigger than you. That's like I think most humans crave that, crave to be a part of teams that are bigger than them, purposes that are bigger than them. It's maybe just like some fundamental thing that we have.
Do you think that's key for someone that has something like blindness or a disability that might seem huge to everyone else, that you don't want to be treated differently? Because I guess for a lot of people, people are injured, and I don't know, sometimes you get the impression people relish being the guy who got injured, or
Yep.
people in sports teams, people almost enjoy the attention or enjoy having an excuse to be different or not to try as hard. And
Yep.
from chatting to you and other Paralympians and para sports people or people without their sight, it seems like you've got to get over that if you're going to progress. You've got to be treated like everyone else.
Yeah, and I think it's an ego thing probably, which I had to check my ego a little bit as I grew up, because you don't want people helping you because you think they're looking down on you. But what I learned through climbing and through just growing up, I guess, was that dependence is a bad thing, but interdependence is a great thing. And so the teams that I've been able to build through my life, sure, I get help from my buddies, and I appreciate that. Like if I'm hiking up a mountain, they're jingling a bear bell in front of me, and maybe like tapping boulders like to avoid, or like just telling me, hey, there's a death fall to the right. I appreciate that help, but yet at the same time, I feel like I'm contributing too. Um, I've helped organize the team. If somebody gets sick, I carry their pack. I'm setting up the tent. I'm cooking food in the stove. I'll take their sleeping bag out of their pack and roll it out, and inflate their thermarest. It doesn't matter as long as you're contributing to the process of the team. You can really feel like you're not that, blind guy getting carried to the summit and spiked on top like a football. You're a real integral part of the team. And that to me is really important, sort of how you do the adventures um, that you set out to do, not just sort of, I guess, the appearance of it from the outside.
Yeah, because I remember reading your book. It must have been, I don't want to make you or me sound too old, but maybe 15 years ago. I remember reading your book a long time ago. And reading it, you forget that you're blind. You are just another guy going climbing. And yeah, you've got something that might be holding you back or might change the dynamic of the team, but you're not just being taken to the summit of Everest, as an example. You're part of the team that climbed Everest.
I like to think that, yeah. I think there's some mean comment I read online or something after Everest, and they said, "Well, anyone could climb Everest with um, 13 seeing eye guides." And I was like, "Nah, you don't quite get it. I didn't get
No.
dragged up there. I've never gotten dragged up a mountain. I've always, as I said, I've always felt like I've contributed to my teams, and some really good ways. And when you climb with strong people, as I said, you got to get over yourself because you're never going to be the fastest, strongest, best climber on the team. I climb with these amazing people, but as long as I am there, in the game, pushing myself, I don't care if I'm having to work twice as hard as everyone else. That's the deal. It's great. I'm just so grateful to be out there, being a part of this thing. As I said, that's bigger than me. That's always been the thing that's motivated me.
And when you got into climbing, what was it about it that captured you? Was it the physical challenge, the movement, or was it the feeling of, even though you might not be able to see how far away the ground is, the feeling that you're in this incredible place a long way off the floor?
I guess all those things. I've never seen myself as an adrenaline junkie. Like I'm not like I'm not cheating death or anything like that. I've never felt that way. I think most people in the mountains don't have that attitude either. But so it's not like I love risky endeavors or I'm like a daredevil or anything like that. I've always been really careful. I'm kind of a chicken. Like I really build great teams around me. I prepare a lot. I really train hard. Um, I have tons and tons of systems. Like I put the time in to be able to get my crampons on pretty fast and navigate and climb frozen waterfalls and how to do things by feel and by touch. So I guess it's all those things. Uh, um, you know, the process of moving up a mountain, the rhythm of moving up a mountain. Yeah, the scenery, which is for me like the crunch of the snow and the feel of the rock and the wind and the sun and the sense of a open space around you. And I think the people that you climb with are really, it's fun as well because you get to know people in a way that's hard to get to know them in other ways because you're so vulnerable. There are days where you're just laid out and people see the true you and it's hard to ignore that. And so you get to know people in a way that's maybe different from our everyday lives.
When you talk about the crunch of snow under your feet and the feel of the rock, do you find yourself picturing where you are?
Yeah, I always do. Yeah, I always create like a visual in my head because I could see until, as I said, I was 13, 14 years old. So my brain is not dormant. It's hearing things and touching things and smelling things, and then all that information is going into my brain, and my brain is creating a very visual image of where I am, of my place, and on this mountain or on the river. And I really want to understand what that map looks like. I have to understand it. Like I'm kind of like I sort of just I have to kind of understand where my place is in that space. So like when I've climbed peaks in the Himalayas, often I've gone to like the American Mountaineering Club and American Alpine Club, which is right here in Golden, and felt like a tactile map, a topographical map of the mountain, so that when I climb it, I know exactly where I am, the different positions on the mountain.
Because I think for a lot of people that do outdoor sports, being in the environment is a huge part of the enjoyment, and it's not immediately obvious. unless you've read your books or know your story, how that would translate to someone who's blind.
Yeah.
But you clearly relish the environment um, and maybe understand it on a level that people that have all their senses working perfectly maybe miss.
Yeah. But I am like a little bit like, because like, say I'm on a big rock face, it's 20 pitches or something, and you got to move quickly. Like, I'm the guy counting the pitches, like, okay, I've done 8, I have 12 more to go. Okay. And the crux is coming up. Like, I like to know that kind of stuff because being blind, I can't just look up and assess things. So, like, I come into my climbs with a lot of prep and a lot of knowledge and, sort of some math in my brain, and that's why actually, not to leap too far forward, but that's the way reason kayaking was a hard sport for me to learn because it was like embracing chaos. You couldn't control anything.
What's the journey to being a kayaker been like?
Um, well, it just was like an organic process. I was climbing this frozen waterfall in Nepal, a beautiful ice face called Losar, and I was up high with my friend, and we were kind of cold and miserable. And he's like, hey, like the best day on the river or the worst day on the river is better than the best day in the mountains. And I'm like, oh yeah, I don't know if I believe that. And he's like, oh yeah, because you can bring like beer and food and you know what I mean? And it's like, you don't have to like watch every pound that you're carrying on your back. And I was like, cool, I'd like to try this river thing. So
It sounds pretty appealing when you put it like that.
yeah, and you're shivering up there on this ice face. So yeah, it sounds fun in the sun. And anyway, so yeah, he taught me a combat roll, and it just progressed from there. And I said, hey, would you maybe guide me down like an easy river? And he did, and then another river, and it just kept leading on to bigger things. And at some point, I thought, well, I'd like to try some big water. And so it led ultimately to the Grand Canyon, which I kayaked in 2014 or something like that. So yeah, I had 6 years of kayaking pretty intensely, maybe 7 or 8 years.
How does kayaking compare to climbing as a sport for someone without their sight? I mean,
I thought it was harder than the mountains in certain ways because mountain climbing it's slow, it's step by step. It's really hard. It's physically hard, but it's step by step. It's pretty methodical. But kayaking, you're going the pace of the river, so you can't put on the brakes. You can't like skiing. I get in over my head. I just like come to a stop and go, okay, I'll take a few deep breaths. Okay, now I start up again, right? But in kayaking, you can't do that. So you're at the pace of the river, and my friends would try to map out the rapid that I'm about to go into, and then you got to take this deep breath, and I can't see what's in front of me, and I just have to paddle straight into that tumult, and it was hard on the psyche because you're like, why am I paddling into this storm where I'm going to get my butt kicked for the next 2 minutes? Like, why am I doing this? It was kind of overwhelming for me.
but nowadays, what's your confidence level with kayaking? I mean, are you pretty happy with the whole thing? If you found that flow that seems so elusive when people start kayaking, which I have to say I never found.
I found it a few times. Yeah, but it's hard. You got to work hard to get the flow. You got to put in that, as you always hear those 10,000 hours. So yeah, it doesn't come easy. But yeah, no, I mean, I remember there was a rapid called Upset, and I was really nervous about it on the Grand Canyon. And it's a pretty big rapid, and you got to kind of do this counterintuitive sort of move to the left and break through a wave, and then there's massive waves like pounding against the wall, and there's a big hole that you do not want to go into on the right, and you kind of thread the needle through it. And my guide was like, relax, you got to just breathe. When you're nervous and tense, you're actually screwing yourself up and making yourself a worse kayaker. So how do you not fall into that trap, because that just makes you more nervous, and anyway, but finally everything came together on this thing. And I just remember threading that needle, listening to this massive waves pounding against the rock and this guttural, hole just churning to the right of me. And I'm threading right through just this perfect line and got through that rapid. And just, you're like sort of one with this experience. And so you work for 6 years to get like 40 seconds of this thing you're talking about. It's a lot of work for 40 seconds of flow.
Yeah, but then I remember a famous British climber said that he would climb all year for 2 hours of flow.
Yep, it's worth it because once you do it, once you get it, you want to get it back. You want to connect. I don't mean to get goofy or anything, but for me, it was almost like a spiritual connection because it wasn't like my body and my brain separate from everything in the world, trying to sort of master this foreign environment. I just felt connected. And this flow is like this connection with the environment, with the river, with the canyon, and the sort of like the crust gets ripped away, and you're just experiencing this, like the sort of your light inside is connecting with this light on the outside, and it was like it is the most. It's been the most powerful things that I've ever experienced. These moments of flow. I've had them in the mountains too.
You might you might say this is the most stupid thing you've ever heard, but I think the feeling of flow is probably identical for you as it is for a fully sighted kayaker, because when you're absolutely in flow, there's no consciousness at all.
Yeah, everything's slow. Everything slows down, like and again, yeah. But you're not thinking about time. It's yeah. I think it's a good thing to experience. But I've been doing a lot of yoga and a lot of work, sort of meditative stuff, and you know, my friend Christian Levy, who I take yoga from, he does Iyengar yoga, and and he's like, you don't have to go to the Grand Canyon to get this flow thing, right? You can get it like sitting on your couch. But for me, I have had to go to the ends of the earth to sort of at least get a taste of what this thing is, so that then you can bring it home to my normal life, to my parenting, to my interactions with no barriers. For me, that was an important process to go through that, so I could sort of get a taste of this thing, and then kind of try to meld it into my life.
And we've talked about climbing, we've talked about kayaking. These would not be sports that would be immediately obvious as choices for someone in your position. Have you? I mean, but it's the truth. But have you found any sports that you feel you can't do, or are you just do you almost feel not held back, like you can just do anything you want?
No, no, no. In fact, one of the things I tell people at No Barriers a lot, when I'm speaking or working with teams there, is that it's not like anything is possible. I think that in a way is something we should probably let go of. Like, I'm probably never going to be a NASCAR driver. Um, I'm probably not going to, there's a lot of things I probably won't do, and I'm okay with that. Um, so I think though there is a blurry line between the things that we can do and the things that we can't do. And like years ago, there's this rage, excuse me, in the States, where it was like find your strengths, and it was all about finding your strengths. And I think that's a wonderful thing. Of course, you want to find your strengths, but I think the process of finding your strengths, don't cut yourself short. Like, if I had just been traditionally like trying to find my strength as a blind person, I would have never gone to the high mountains of the Himalayas or tried to kayak the Grand Canyon. So I think there is this very blurry line, and it's a lifetime of trying to figure out what you can do and what you can't do, and kind of trying to push the envelope a little bit. I mean, there have been things that I haven't really continued, like I learned to solo paraglide. Um, and I had I did it for a couple years, and I really loved it. And I had some pretty cool flights where I'm up there, and like my guides are talking to me on the radio, and and 90 to the left and 45, and I'm feeling the thermals, and I'm having I thought that was really cool. And I had actually that they would talk me down, but I would also have a string with a really heavy bell on it, that like if I came down and I didn't know where the ground was or the radios weren't working, I'd feel that bell hit the ground, and I would know to flare my wing, and I never had to use that, but I just had it as a redundancy system. But eventually, after 2 years, I'm like, this is stupid. A blind guy solo paragliding. I'm eventually gonna die, and maybe I don't want to do that. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not ever like a crazy evil Knievel kind of guy, and if I just keep pushing this sport, I'm probably gonna wind up dead. So, so yeah, there have been things where I've just made a calculated decision, like, yeah, I'll let this go. It's okay, because there's so many things that I can do.
But I think there's probably a life lesson in that for everyone. I mean, I'm 5'9". I think I'm not going to be playing in the NBA.
Right.
You have to accept for everyone that you just have to find the things you're good at and accept there are some things you're not going to be able to do.
Yeah, and that blurry line of trying to figure that stuff out is life. That's really fun for me. Like I remember when I was learning how to climb, we were climbing Rainier in the winter, and I was set. We came in a big storm, and we were trying to set up tents, and my friends were like, we'll build the ice, walls while you set up the tent." And I'd set up a lot of tents, but never with like these thick gloves on, and I kept trying to take my gloves off to get oriented to the loops and everything of the tent, and these shards of ice would nail my hand, and my hands would go numb. And I just had to kept putting my gloves back on and beating my hands out and like, oh my God, I can't figure this tent out with gloves on. And it was my oversight, like, and my friends came up and set the tent up for me. And I was pretty embarrassed and I was mad at myself. And I went back I was a school teacher at the time in Phoenix, Arizona. And, I would sit there in the field after school, with heavy gloves on, like 90-degree weather in my tank top, setting up the tent and breaking it down again and trying to feel the tent through the gloves. And, I can set up tents in any conditions now. And it was only because I got, I blew it that one time that I learned, like, I kind of had the drive to go, I wonder if this is possible, like to do this with gloves on. And so the process of that happening led me to somewhere I wouldn't have gone in any other way.
Well, speaking of which, I mean, you've led a life that, regardless of circumstances, has taken in places and achievements and experiences that not many people can imagine. Can you begin to picture how things might have turned out if you'd never lost your sight? Do you ever is that something you ever think about, or has this just been reality for so long that everything is within that parameter?
I think it's the second. I don't even know how to guess what my life would have been like as a sighted person. It's almost like I would have been a different person. And then how do you then contemplate yourself as a different person? I mean, you like to think you'd have the same character, and the same motivation and drive, but who knows? Because I think, when things happen to you, sometimes bad things, it sort of creates this process at No Barriers we call alchemy. It's this process where like you take sort of hard things and you figure out how to convert them into like a drive and an energy that carries you forward, sometimes to a new place, like a place that you might not have gone to without that challenge itself. And so I don't know, I don't know where I'd be as a sighted person. Maybe I'd be like working in a cubicle or something.
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, I sometimes, I, it's true, but I mean,
Or Spinal Tap. There was this old movie Spinal Tap, and he said I'd be working in a haberdashery if I wasn't a rock star.
And you turned it up to 11 instead.
Right, exactly.
But I mean, all of us as outdoor sports people have either been involved with bad things happening or had disasters happen to friends and things. And I guess it's a bit like the ultimate sliding door, what would or wouldn't have happened. But it just seems from your character like you'd have always found this life, but maybe without the trigger of losing your sight, you wouldn't have done.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's just a question where I don't know the answer. I will say, that I mean, like taking it outside of me, I've seen this process so many times through No Barriers. In fact, you were in Chamonix. You mentioned a friend of mine lives in Chamonix, Andy Parkin,
And yeah, I've met
and
Andy. Yeah.
yeah, and he has this story where he was a really amazing climber, and the ledge I think that he was on collapsed, and it just like destroyed him. You know, broke so many bones, like squished his heart. You know, he was in the hospital thinking he'd never climb again, and he was so bored he started painting, wheeling his chair up to the window and painting the mountains. And then as he recovered, he healed a little bit. He would take the, teleferiques, the trams up, and he would kind of hobble across the tundra and he would paint the mountains. And he would collect old rusty metal and stuff like that and make sculptures. And he eventually became a climber again. Maybe not the way he was before, but he found his way back to climbing. But in the process, he became an artist. And as you know, he has this awesome studio and outside of Chamonix, and he's a really successful artist. And he wouldn't have been an artist without that process, that no barriers process of trying to find himself and reclaim what he thought had been lost in his life. And he found something new. And I think that's the coolest part, that you find something new along the way. Like you take this little side tour and it winds up being the destination. You didn't know it.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of my proudest possessions is I've got one of Andy Parkin's paintings on my wall, signed by the author.
Cool.
But I guess it's, speaking generally, it's as much of a setback as you view it as.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and looking forward to you now. You've climbed Everest, you've kayaked the Grand Canyon. What gets you off the couch looking forward? Is it big goals, or is it just that day-to-day seeking of the flow we talked about and just the experience of being out there?
Yeah, I think it's that flow. I honestly think it's more of that, to try to figure out how to bring it into my work with no barriers, to bring it into my experience with my relationships. As I said, I was on that trip in Nepal. It wasn't like a very extreme trip. We were just walking and horseback riding and going up over these passes and just, not being one of these guys that just craves extremes. I've done a lot of extremes, and I think it can actually become a dangerous place where you're like, you're craving this extreme and you can't find purpose and meaning in your everyday life. I think we all have to, us adventurers have to be really careful of that because, like the Sherpas, when you climb a peak like Everest, they say that's only the halfway summit. The real summit is, well, obviously getting down alive. But I think what they mean in a deeper way is that you have to come down the mountain and take those gifts, those things you've learned, and and come down into the deep valleys where people exist, and make it count, and bring those gifts into your normal life and use them some way. So for me, as I get older, I turn 50 next year. I've tried to figure out how to marry those two worlds together, the extreme in my life and my work and my teaching and my writing, so that I'm not just like one of these guys that winds up at 70 feeling kind of empty because I can't do these big extreme things anymore.
Well, that's something I wanted to ask you actually. I never really like asking for generic advice, but I was working, broadcasting from a para competition recently, and some of the people there said they enjoyed the podcast, which is always nice.
Awesome.
If people are listening to this who might have suffered a setback, can you condense your lifetime of learning into a piece of advice or a?
Well, I don't know if I could do that, but in my second book, The Adversity Advantage, I teamed up with this scientist, Dr. Paul Stoltz, and he was like a Harvard PhD who had studied adversity at a clinical level. And it was really cool because I learned a lot from him. And we kind of coined this thing. Well, he more did it. I kind of stole it from him. But this idea of quitters, campers, and climbers. And when we talk about that, we talk about, quitters are like people, I don't know, they sabotage themselves and they quit, before they even get started. That's really hard to work with. But campers are like people who start out excited, adventurous, hopeful, and then things kind of beat them down along the way. And then they stop, and then they start stagnating, and they get shoved to the sidelines, and now they're just in this place they don't want to be. And I think a lot of human beings wind up in that place that they don't want to be. We found through our work with that book that a lot of people wind up in that place. And how do you continue to climb, metaphorically? How do you continue to challenge yourself, to evolve, to grow in a graceful way through your life? And that's what I've been devoting sort of my life to, trying to figure that out, that process, try to teach it with, the 10,000 people that we work with at No Barriers, so that people can continue to find purpose in their lives. And part of that equation is sort of figuring out how you're going to elevate, yourself and the people around you and your community, your school, whatever, your family, whatever it may be. Kind of trying to take it outside yourself and, give back in some way. So I don't know. That's maybe my soundbite, the best I can do.
Well, it's a lovely soundbite, and we've been through the people that work for No Barriers. We've been trying to connect for a long time, and as I say, I nearly caught you in person, but regardless,
are you going to be back in the States again?
I'll be back next year. So
yeah.
maybe we could do a follow-up. I think we'll get quite a lot of questions about this episode because it's been fascinating, and I really appreciate you taking a bit of time out of what sounds like a very busy schedule and chatting to us.
Yeah, it's great. I love talking to you. It's a really nice interview. And, but not to say I don't have a lot of goals ahead. Like I just talked to a buddy of mine about skiing over the Greenland ice cap, and I'm going back to the Himalayas next year. So, all that stuff I was saying, philosophical stuff, I still like climbing. I still want to keep getting after it.
Yeah, but I think it's maybe an inevitable process that I and a lot of outdoor people went through where, tell me if this is not what you've experienced, but it becomes a bit less goal-orientated and a bit more experience-orientated.
You got it. Yeah, totally. Yeah, it becomes about the people and the experiences. So... yeah, like I'm on the injured list. I have a little injury, but I'm gonna get back and fit and start climbing really hard because I have a goal I'm gonna go to Wadi Rum this winter, which is in Jordan, and these beautiful sandstone towers. And I'm going with a really nice group of people. A really good friend of mine, Timmy O'Neill, who's a really funny, crazy, famous climber here in Colorado. And so yeah, it becomes about like just having these amazing experiences with people that you really love spending time with.
Thank you again to Erik for being so open about his story and so generous with his time. You can find out more about him by going to erikweihenmayer.com, and I also recommend you to check out nobarriersusa.org. That is it from us this week. We do hope you are enjoying these shows, and if you are, I have a favour to ask. It doesn't involve getting your wallet out, don't panic. This is always going to be a free podcast, but it really does help us out if you can go onto iTunes and leave us a review. Also, if you've got any feedback on the show or you want to get in touch, you can do so by emailing us at contact@thewinningmentality.com. Speak to you next Sunday.